All right, I wanted to talk today about a project I did a bit ago. Um, I made myself a historically accurate D-guard mostly Confederate D-guard Bowie knife. It's made out of a very old, what I think is an old rasp and file and crosscut file combination. The D-guard is made out of wrought iron, and I'll show you some of the details. The ferrules for the handle, they're also made out of wrought iron, and I'll show you some of the details. They were welded together to form a pipe-like construction. And then the end is peened over. The handle's Osage orange, which I think in my reference material I can point to where they use this wood. Kind of makes sense to me because it's a very dense wood. It would have been readily available. They call it bodark down south. But I'm going to talk about this project and some, if you're into historical reproduction, how to get information outside of the internet. And we're going to discuss that today. All right, so if you're interested in this subject, what I have here is, I think it's the best book. It's got a lot of pictorial references. It's got some first-person journal entries, a lot of historical pictures from tintypes and things. It talks about the psychology of the South. Now, this weapon was primarily used by the South, and then were taken home as trophies by the North. And so I'm going to show that. My ancestors, I'm from Ohio, and the ancestors got here from New England in around 1799, 1800 to have a homestead and buy land, which we're still occupying to this day. But in this book, Confederate Bowie Knives by Jack Melton, Josh Phillips, and John Sexton is a really good book, and I'm going to point out some reference material that I used to make this project, and it just makes the project kind of interesting. I didn't do this to make a replica. I did this and I like to interpret stuff and kind of make an amalgamation of different characteristics that I found interesting. So that's what I did. This picture in the book is one of my favorites. Notice how these are the Patillo brothers. They're from the down south in Georgia. Notice how their blades are all, roughly sword or spear tip blades. And I wanted to read, so this is where I first got some inspiration to build my project. And it was mainly off of this quote, which I'm going to read to you. When the Patillo brothers marched off to fight the Yankees, they meant business, leaving their native Georgia for Virginia in the fall of 1861. They had every expectation of freeing their nation from the invasion and returning home by Christmas. One glance at the grizzled and determined faces leaves no doubt as to their intent to kill a dozen Yankees, each with a large D-guard knife that they brandished. However prepared they seem in this great photo, they could not have foreseen the 4 years of desperate struggle in front of them. Wearing battle shirts and early war havelocks, this image captured them at their moment of greatest hope. 3 of the brothers hold knives made by the same local artisan. The many thousands of similar knives made in the South between 1861 and 1865 are the subject of this book. Most Southern-made weapons were copies of their counterparts made in the North. So it talks about that. It gives you an excellent historical picture of people at the beginning of the war and the weapons that they thought they were pretty cool. It'd be like if you had your staccato or your Glock or something, or your AR. They had like a cool photograph, family picture, pretty badass. This picture in the book is from a smith in Alabama. They classified it as an Alabama D-guard Bowie knife. My guard is different, but what is interesting to me is the similarity in the wood. Like, it looks a lot like Osage orange. And then the ferrule here, that you can see the grain, and you can see the grain in that. It's likely wrought iron. So that's an interesting tidbit or an example. This example comes from Georgia Arsenal. They used a bone handle, but the detail I liked is they used two ferrules, one on either end. And it's difficult to see, but they peened this over and did a really nice job of blending it and welding it. Not so much on mine. In my opinion, these were rather crudely forged. Not crudely forged, but I guess expeditiously forged. And I just wanted to show this for the two ferrule details, which is important. This blade, the detail I liked is the false edge. Although mine has a convex, double convex grind, kind of similar to this, and not as pronounced of a false edge, they did have false edges towards the tip. It's like a spear tip. In this case, it's a bronze cast handle. Here's an example of an S-guard, but what I liked is how they brought this part and kind of did this. So you'd have a place to, like, perhaps catch an enemy's sword and disarm them. But I like that kind of element. And where I don't see any examples of this style guard with this pronounced curve here, I liked it, and since I'm making it, I included it in my piece. What I liked about the book is it really covers the debate as to whether they were made of old files or rasps. When I use the term file, I also I'm going to include rasp, but this is an interesting excerpt about what it took to make a file back in the day. I thought it was really interesting. The real work then began by the cutter, who with nothing more than a hammer and chisel cut each line of the file, twice for a crosscut, and repeated the process on the other side. For the whole file, there are probably 22,000 cuts, each made with a separate blow of the hammer and the cutting tool being shifted after each blow. Follows it up by the mass-produced Sheffield files were exported to the Confederacy by the tens of thousands. Keep in mind that every new file imported freed up one old file for recycling use or making into a knife. It's kind of interesting. I have found online where some historically, some examples with strict provenance were obviously made out of a file or a rasp. And so that's what I did here. Here you can see in a lot of examples, the hidden tang of the knife was peened over to capture the D-guard and blade in the handle. In this case, there's no ferrules. It's just a chunk of wood. I did the same treatment in mine. And sometimes it was rather crudely done, or I wouldn't say crudely, but expeditiously done. They didn't want to spend a lot of time on fit and finish in this particular case because it was more of a tool, I think. So just my thoughts on it. I'm certainly by no means an expert. As you can see on my project, I forged this out of wrought iron. You can see some of the grain structure in the wrought iron here. The ferrules are also wrought iron, and it was forge welded. You can see one of the lines here. I must have ground away the line here. You can't really see it. Peened over tang, which was historically accurate. And then the blade I'm going to discuss in just the next clip. So the blade itself is the spear point with a false edge on top. It's a double convex grind. It does have a decent thick spine, and it was made out of a rasp combination crosscut file. I elected to leave the marks in there and not get rid of them so you could see what type of material that it was made out of. It's pretty pointy, but it's not sharp. I have no real need to, it's pretty sharp. It's probably got a couple thousandths more to go. It could be easily sharpened, but I had no need to really sharpen it at this point. And that's what they look like. You know, it turned out really well. It's hard to see now, but I think this is a very old rasp, because before it was forged, if you looked at the marks, they were really uniform but not perfect. Same thing with the cross cuts. They were not, the spacing wasn't like a factory. It was a little slightly off, and the angles were slightly off. And as the book says, they may have had to do this 22,000 times. I guess they counted it all up, but that's a lot of work. And so this being historical material, an old rasp, wood they would have used, wrought iron for the guard. It's definitely like a pretty accurate historical reproduction. I took some liberties because I just like the aesthetics of what I did. And it was a good knife to start with because they weren't forged like real perfectly. The fit and finish of them on a lot of examples is not pristine. It's not, they didn't take a lot of time to do a fit and finish that was perfect. I hope you enjoyed this video. I wanted it to be, I don't know, I collect books on topics that I'm interested in, and this is an excellent book. So it's both a review of this book in the context of the project I used the book for. So this book just hits differently than acquiring information through the internet, because you have time to digest the information. The way the book's put together with a lot of visual representations is helpful for me, but I also enjoyed the historical context of what they did, both in a factory setting and in a local blacksmith setting, to prepare people for the Civil War, which is what was an exceptionally bloody conflict. One of the excerpts in the book describes how a lot of times they would get into arguments in their camp, and they would just kill each other. You know, they were on the same team, and they would, had an argument, and they would kill each other with these knives, and that's horrible. But it's also kind of a cool piece of history that brings you closer to the struggles that they had to come up with as far as shortages during the war. It's a great book. It covers a lot of details. So I encourage you to get it if you're interested in this topic. I hope you found this video inspirational, and I encourage you to look outside of the internet for information. Books are still a viable option, and it gives you a really well-rounded perspective on its subject. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, comment, and subscribe. And as I say, always be in a hurry to get to your shop. Never be in a hurry to leave. Take it easy. Tom of All Trades, signing off. Okay.